I'll start off with giving you a quick description of Bill C-38 and what it does. It's the budget implementation bill, and the government is rushing to pass it through in the next 2 weeks. What it does is it essentially hands over our environment to energy products on a golden platter. Some examples are energy projects will be exempt from the Species at Risk Act, so they will be allowed to harm and destroy endangered species habitat. Other examples are, which Andrew already mentioned, are completely rewriting the Environmental Assessment Act, and now Environmental Assessment Acts will only apply to fish and migratory species. So what about those key species? What about the endangered species? What about the caribou? What about those humpback whales? So those are some quick examples. There's many more, but in 2 minutes I don't quite have the time to cover the almost 70 pieces of legislation that are going to be modified in that one bill. It's a completely undemocratic move, and it centralizes power within the cabinet. And if you don't think that you're going to lose democracy with that bill, you're fooling yourself. I was just briefly talking to somebody who grew up in the apartheid, and she mentioned that a big problem with the apartheid government was that power was centralized with one minister. That's what this bill does. It removes power from independent review agencies and puts it in the hands of the cabinet. You have centralization of power within a few conservative hands. If there's one message I'd want to get out tonight, is that you guys are really lucky here to have NDP MLAs and MPs, but you all likely know somebody in a conservative riding. And I want you to encourage those people to write to their MPs and tell them that they do not support Bill C-38 and they do not support Enbridge.
Thank you, Megan. And now Ora Kogan will tell us a little bit about herself.
Thank you for having me here tonight. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Sinaiks territory right now, and thank the Sinaiks people for allowing us to be here. I've had the honor to stand in solidarity with the Haltic Nation during the JRP hearings up in Bella Bella. I don't speak for them, and I can't speak on that too much. But I'd really encourage you to listen in on the hearings that are happening on the coast. They're both, yeah, it's a corrupt process, but it's also really inspiring to hear what people are saying. And you can listen to it, it's streaming live. I've organized several events with the Salt Spring No Pipeline Coalition with a bunch of young people, with events with music and speakers from the Haltic Nation, from Dogwood Initiative and Pacific Wild, all sorts of art and creative stuff. That all of the events that I've helped to organize have been attended by hundreds of people. They've been amazing, they've been positive and informative, they've unified all of us. We're all working together on Salt Spring Island and Bella Bella. Everywhere I've gone so far, it's been pretty awe-inspiring to see how it's bringing so many people together on this issue, standing together. Organized a protest up in Bella Bella as well. I've been going through tribal protocol with everything I'm doing. I'm learning what it means to stand in solidarity with First Nations people in British Columbia. And it's been a beautiful journey, and I'm really, you know, it's exciting. It's scary, all this stuff, but it's so amazing to see what the potential is when we win this. Every time I've spoken to students and communities, friends, it's been so positive. Everyone's coming together, like I said. Everything I've written, you know, I'm not even a writer. Everything I've written has caught fire on the internet, getting thousands of people. And why I'm saying this is not to boast I feel like I was asked to speak on what I've been doing, you know, as an example, but what I'm trying to say is that you throw a pebble out into the water with information, with art, with music, with creative spirit, community spirit, or political engagement, and it will ripple across the sea because of the solidarity, because of the unified nature of what's happening here, because of the critical mass. There is a multiplicity of ways to engage in this struggle. It's a very personal thing, politics. It's for everybody to decide how they do it. And we are going to win this if we stand together, all walks of life, as a solid front in opposition against the pipeline.
Thank you, Ora. And then, of course, you know, we have Art Sterrett, Andrew Nikiforuk, and Billy Joe Gray, who are also on the panel. So what I will ask you to do is perhaps stand up. If you have a question, stand up. When I acknowledge you, say your name, where you're from, and ask to whom your question is addressed. Yes?
My question is to Art.
What's your name?
My name is John.
Okay.
I've read that not all First Nations are united against this. Could you clarify that, please? And I've also read that 55% of northern British Columbians are for this project. So statistics and polls are confusing. But my main question are all First Nations united?
In British Columbia, we have two main First Nations organizations. One is called the First Nations Summit, and the other is the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. And between those two organizations, they represent all First Nations in British Columbia. And both of those organizations have passed resolutions opposing the Northern Gateway project. Now, having said that, there are also other all of the coastal First Nations, every First Nation from the BC-Alaska border all the way down Vancouver is opposed to tankers on the coast. So they have each come out and said that individually. But it isn't just the First Nations either. We have the Union of BC Municipalities in British Columbia have opposed it. You heard Andrew talking about Prince Rupert, but there's also Terrace, and there's Hazelton, and there's Smithers, and there's Victoria, and there is Whistler, and so on and so forth. I mean, the opposition in this, one of the reasons that Coastal First Nations engaged in an exercise to get communities to express opposition to Northern Gateway is because the president of Enbridge told us, if all the communities are against the project, we won't do it. And so we worked for a couple of years, all the Coastal First Nations said, we're against. So we went back to Enbridge and said, okay, we're all against, go home. They said, oh no, we've got a few other people in the interior you've got to talk to. So then we got all of the First Nations along the route, literally from Haisla all the way through to the Carrier-Secondary and all of the First Nations along the pipeline route, and they said, we're against. So we went back to them and they said, oh no, there's some non-native communities in the area and they might support the project. And we said, okay, let's have at it. So we went to the Union of BC Municipalities and they passed almost unanimously a motion to oppose the Northern Gateway project, and we went back to Enbridge and they said, so what? We've got the Prime Minister in our pocket and we're going ahead with this project, and that's what we're dealing with in British Columbia.
Another question? Nobody has questions?
Hi, my name's Candace, and this is also a question for Art Sterrett. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the impacts. I know that you're in the community of Hartley Bay, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the Queen of the North.
Did everybody hear that?
Yeah. The question was around what impact has the Queen of the North had on the Gitga'at people, Hartley Bay?
Yeah.
Well, the Queen of the North is sitting at the bottom of the channel. Just by the way, when tankers come out of Kitimat, they come down Douglas Channel, and where they turn is right exactly where the Queen of the North is sitting. So they would have to make a 90-degree turn there, and then they go over about 2 miles, and then they make another 90-degree turn, and then they make about a 45-degree turn, and then another 45, and another 90. And this is all within about a 20-kilometer area. You asked the question about what has been the impact of the Queen of the North. The Queen of the North has caused the Gitga'at people to stay away from many of their fishing grounds. BC Ferries had said that they were going to go in and try and recover the bodies of the 2 people that were lost in the Queen of the North. And our people, because they have respect for these people and their bodies are still there, they don't harvest food in the area. But not only that, and what we call the tears of the people that are there, there's oil that's bubbling up from the Queen of the North and comes up every day. And so it'll continue to contaminate shellfish beds and cod jigging grounds and that within that area until it's cleaned up. And we don't think they'll ever do that, although this project might cause them to do that. We have another spill that had bombs and that on it. It's a U.S. Army ship. That was 60 years ago, went down, and it's beginning to fall apart. And the oil is beginning to spill out wider and wider. And this year they went down, you probably saw it in the news, they went down and they patched it again. I mean, can you imagine? They patch rotting old steel to try and stop oil from getting in there. That's the kind of things that this government is looking at. We get no satisfaction. We have no confidence that anybody will ever clean anything up. I want to add a little detail. When we went into Alaska, we found out that 7% of the oil from the Exxon Valdez was cleaned up. The herring in Prince William Sound have never returned. They're not there. That's 100% of the herring stocks were gone. 1% of the marble murrelets have returned. The clam beds are all contaminated. In the Gulf of Mexico, they cleaned up, about 18% of the oil got cleaned up. 12% of it by microorganisms eating it. And so again, what we found out is that spills that are happening around the world, because technology is getting better, ships are getting bigger, the spills are getting larger. But the one thing that has never changed in the last 25 years or 23 years since the Exxon Valdez, there is no new technology to clean up oil. And you heard Andrew talk about this new bitumen. It's worse than any oil that's ever been spilled. It'll drop to the bottom of the ocean. It will kill halibut grounds. I had halibut and chips tonight. You won't be getting halibut and chips in British Columbia if this spill happens, because it'll wipe out every halibut bed. It'll wipe out every cod bed in the coast of British Columbia. I just wanted to add that as a technical detail. Sorry.
Well, that's fine. Any other questions? Yes, David?
Yeah, I was skimming through Andrew Nikiforov's book earlier on, and I came across this one thing. So I wondered if you could elucidate. There is a little bit in the chapter 12 towards the end that talks about the, I guess, signing or enacting of the Civil Assistance Plan of 2008 and some of the ramifications of that.
The Civil Assistance Plan of 2008? Can you give me a little more context? I wrote that book in 2008, so...
It allows soldiers from either country, Canada and the U.S., to curb civil unrest, defend oil facilities, or, quote, support rapid decision-making in a collaborative environment, unquote.
Okay, so what you're referring to is an agreement between the Government of Canada and the Government of the United States that in the event of civil unrest, the armies of both countries would work together to put down that civil unrest.
In comes the Marines.
So much for democracy.
These facilities would require an awful lot of supertanker traffic of a different kind in the Douglas Channel. And your question is entirely legitimate. It's a different resource with a different set of political and economic consequences and with a different environmental impact, but arguably shale gas is to British Columbia what bitumen has been to Alberta. Now the Haisla have signed an agreement in principle to build a terminal in Kitimat, an LNG terminal. And they've decided, they voted, they said, look, we'd rather go with natural gas than go with oil. I think there are major issues with that. The GitGat would say, we really don't want LNG tankers or oil tankers going up Douglas Channel. But I think the really important issue is that as British Columbians, you have not recognized how this resource is beginning to dominate provincial politics. The chief advisors to Premier Christy Clark are all involved in the shale gas business. More than 5% of government revenue is now coming from this industry. The government at the same time is subsidizing this industry with infrastructure, roads, low royalties, and water giveaways. And each and every British Columbia needs to start asking more serious questions about the scale and pace of shale gas. Now, the last thing I'll say about it is that Dave Hughes, who lives on Cortes Island, remember this is the energy expert guy that used to work for Natural Resources Canada for 36 years. I've known Dave for a long, long time. I've always gone, when he used to live in Calgary, and I say, Dave, explain the energy consequences of this play, whatever it was at the time. And so Dave has written some really important pieces on this. And he says, number one, you don't have enough gas to export it to China. Number two, by the time you build these LNG terminals, the so-called higher price that you're trying to get in Asian markets will disappear because the Australians will beat us. And that we will lose important energy security by exporting this stuff abroad. There needs to be a provincial debate about it. There needs to be a real discourse about this subject.
You asked the question about why there hasn't been this major outcry around natural gas or LNG. And there's a simple fact about the substance itself compared to bitumen. If you have an accident with a ship carrying, 3 million barrels of oil, you will kill everything on the coast of British Columbia. That's a simple fact. If you have an accident in GitGat territory or any other territory with natural gas, it'll dissipate into the air. Now you're still going to have environmental damage from the oil that happens to be running that ship and other things. But the reality is people are not looking at it because of the light that's being shone on Enbridge right now. And they're seeing this as an absolute catastrophe. They're looking at this as the lesser of two evils. And now the other thing that we have, Coastal First Nations, have not come up with a position on LNG yet. We have done some investigation. We've talked to the chief, for example, of Fort Nelson, Kathy Dickey, and she has said the concern that she has is that there's no plan. Just as though there's no plan for the tar sands, there is no plan for LNG in British Columbia. It's like Andrew says, what the heck are we doing? We've got a non-renewable resource that should be able to enhance the lives of British Columbians for, a couple hundred years or so. But we're in a hurry to export this in such a way that it's actually going to jeopardize the environment by the virtue of the number of ships that are going to be going in and out of Douglas Channel and Prince Rupert, by the way, because they're going to run out of room in Kitimat after 2 or 3 plants, and they're proposing to go into Prince Rupert with 2 more of them. Well, I agree with Andrew. They're probably not going to get these plants in place in time to beat the Australians and all of the other markets to the Asian markets. Once they get there, and that's the market that we're all depending on, that market is going to dictate the price that we're going to get for it anyway. The price is high there now because there isn't much going. And everything has been shut down in Japan, for example. They shut down all of their nuclear reactors, so they need natural gas, so that's driving the price up. But by the time you get there and they have you locked in, as their only market, they're going to drive the price down on you. It happens all over the world. So I think my problem is we don't have an energy plan for British Columbia. And I think all of us should be pushing for that. And as we speak, Coastal First Nations is actively involved in a conversation with the provincial government, and one of the conditions we're putting on us, if we do come out and support LNG, is that there be an energy plan for British Columbia, because we don't have it. There is no environmental assessments done when you go fracking in Fort Nelson and those areas. The chief told us they don't do environmental assessments when they go into those areas. They make sure that each project is small enough that it doesn't trigger an environmental assessment. So it is running hog wild over the people in the Northeast right now.
Oh, yes, okay. Kay Linda.
Okay, my name is Kay Linda, and we're talking about Enbridge and those guys, the tar sands, not having a plan. I'd like to address Billy Joe and Aura. I want to know what our plan is to work in solidarity with First Nations in Aboriginal Columbia. Aboriginal Columbia. Where do we start?
On the streets.
Well, okay, solidarity is one thing. So I just wanted to mention our Dogwood Initiative has an amazing toolkit that you can download. It's about 30 hours of volunteer work that you commit to, and it's just basically tools to, to get things going in your community, get everybody on the same page. As far as solidarity goes, I was talking to Marilyn Slett, the chief councillor of the Heiltsuk Nation, elected chief councillor, and she told me, solidarity looks different in every situation, going through tribal protocol, talking to people like Art and, talking to people, keeping in touch and listening to what Coastal First Nations are saying, and if you're planning an action, like what I'd recommend as a non-native citizen in unceded Coast Salish territory, invite and if you're doing something in a community, do what these guys are doing and make sure that there's a presence of people that can speak, from Coastal First Nations, from First Nations communities. Make sure that there's dialogue. There's so little dialogue going on in our province, so little understanding about all sorts of social and environmental issues that concern all of us. So, opening that up, I think there are a lot of ways of doing that, but especially for events, getting everybody together.
I'd like to say that, as a First Nations person, that I look at it, and I didn't get to meet Art until today, and part of it, I was telling my daughter in audience when I was listening to him being introduced. One of my very first calls that came out for me to come into Canada and get involved was from a man over by Hazelton, and I looked on the map and I thought, where's Hazelton at, and I didn't have no idea where it was at. And then finding out where he came from, I thought, oh no, this is from the same territory that this man, his people, members of his people had heard about me in Spokane, Washington. They heard me speak out there as I speak for One Earth, because there is only one Earth. What I've gone around with into many of the states is to try to empower the people, the First Nations people, to reconnect on that. We're all still intertwined. We're still connected to her. There was so much in the dispiriting process when, our continent, the North American continent, was invaded, to taking away our relationship with Mother Earth, that I go out and I have tried to reconnect people that are not connected, that the dollar is not there, that we need the balance and the harmony that Art was talking about, and that the people need to stand together. When the First Nations people put out their call, what I did is I travel on my own little funds. I do my own little fundraisers. My daughter and I ended up running a fever, and I don't mean to share this, but in running over time, but we do our funds to get where we need to go. So when I looked at Hazelton from where I'm at, way down in the States, and I said, you know, my prayers, you know, I'm not sure how I can help this person. I looked at where Hazelton was at from where I'm at along the Columbia down here, way down the mouth from where you guys are. And I said, you know, I put it to prayers. I sent it to a lot of people that I know, even in Alaska, because through the Western Mining Action Network, I have became connected with other First Nations people throughout Canada and the United States. And so I passed the information on to other people, hoping that, you know, because I was not, had enough funds in my pocket to run over there, even though my heart and my prayers were with the people over there when they very first lit this bonfire when I first got my very first call. And I knew about the Spirit Bear, and in supporting them, I am a part of their support already before this Enbridge came through, you know, when the recognition for protecting his habitat, you know, before the mining came through, but it was from the logging, and I'm sure that it was all, you know, in exploitation. But what I would like to do with the First Nations people and all people is to remind them that we are all interconnected, that we all share one earth. And so when I go out and visit other people, like I said, there's so many people that have become dispirited and let go of all their connections with our Mother Earth. And in our language, it is Kimura. And she's very sacred to us. We all share the same water. We all share the same air and the same water. And with the Spirit, you know, each one of us look at it in a different way, but that Spirit is directly what connects all of my people. As his name comes from, he comes from the Eagle Clan, as he had mentioned. Each one of the people that still carry their names that have been passed down, as my mother had passed my name down to me, it came down from her grandmother. It's directly connected to the earth, and many people still are. Not all of them have that, and it's reuniting them and reminding them that, you know, as my Sioux side of Lakota, all colors are all of us. It's not just one race that will protect her and save our future. And that's like why I formed the Visions for Our Future, is to be able to go out and help people and empower them and to make a stand and to give them the right that they have the right to stand up, you know, for our future and for all these resources. So it's kind of, I think I went over my time too. I had a 2-minute time. But, you know, if we can empower each other and empower the First Nations people and empower those that they don't understand, you know, that we only have one future and we only have one Mother Earth, that we need to protect her. And if we want a future, our lives do not end right here. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take one last question and then we're going to wind up. Is it Doug?
My name is Doug Piper. Read in the Golden Mail today, just actually came out today, that the Enbridge is launching a multi-million-dollar ad campaign to gain support of Canadians and British Columbians. I would just like to hear some views from the panel about the media will be used as a vehicle for that ad campaign. I would just like to hear your views on what is the responsibility of the media in this whole issue. Generally, Canadians and British Columbians are relatively uninformed about this, and I think that a large of that responsibility lies on the shoulders of the media. So yeah, I'd like to hear your views on the responsibility of the media in addressing this whole issue entirely.
So who's going to answer this, or Aura?
Can I say something quickly?
Sure.
So social media is an amazing thing, doing fundraising initiatives.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh,
We don't know what he asked.
Oh, wow. The question was about media's role with all of this, the Enbridge ad campaigns. I don't know if you guys have seen just the immense amount you know, advertising that's going on from Enbridge, you know, the posturing that's going on. So to counter that, social media is an incredible tool, we all know. Doing fundraising initiatives within communities to start our own ad campaigns from organizations, from communities that reach out east and counter that message, counter Enbridge's message in the media. There are a lot of different ways to do that, and it's starting to happen already. So, you know, that's what I wanted to say.
Yes, and Art wanted to add to that.
You're absolutely right. Actually, what happens when Enbridge has been pretty quiet for a while. You may or may not be aware, but at the end of May was their deadline for First Nations to sign on to equity agreements with them. So they're launching their campaign on the heels of that. So they're expecting to come out with some kind of announcement, and they have a majority of Alberta First Nations who've signed on to agree to this. So they're claiming that they have enough people to go ahead with the project. But what happens with the press, what we find as Coastal First Nations, every time Enbridge opens their mouth, or the Prime Minister, or Joe Oliver, or Peter Kent, they give us a gift. And Enbridge has done it again. They're launching a campaign, and on the heels of that campaign, we will answer everything that they put out there. And I'll just read you the press release that we put out this afternoon. Enbridge's multi-million-dollar ad campaign is an act of desperation to try and sell a project that clearly doesn't have the support of First Nations or British Columbians. The proposed Northern Gateway project may be Enbridge's path to the future. That's what they're calling it. It's their path to the future, but it's not a path First Nations or British Columbians will take. The misguided campaign is intended to convince British Columbians that the proposed Northern Gateway is in their interests. What is needed is a full and fact-based debate on the subject. That's why my organization has been reaching out to British Columbians across BC, where they work, where they live. And it's unfortunate that Enbridge has to choose a high-priced Toronto ad firm to try and tell us what we should think, instead of doing the hard work by knocking on doors in British Columbia. It's this type of thinking that has led Coastal First Nations to lose trust in Enbridge. It's pretty clear from the beginning that Enbridge does not want to answer the hard questions about the project. We've had serious concerns about the significant risk of this. And I would urge Enbridge to publicly debate myself and others and let the public decide on the merits of this project in their own. So we view, on the heels of their announcement, we're challenging them to a public debate. There's another group called the Board of Change in Vancouver. It's a whole bunch of professionals in Vancouver, about 1,000 of them. And I spoke there last Thursday evening along with Rafe Mayer. And there was supposed to be Enbridge and the federal government and others, the other part of the panel, were supposed to have a debate, and none of them showed up. They would not show up because they don't have the answers, and we do. And so we're going to continue to challenge them, and hopefully we'll bring them out of the bush. So that's part of how we try to use the press. When they use the press, they give us a bunch of gifts, and that's what we're going ahead with. So, thank you.
I'd just like to say one thing. The question is really about, well, what about the media and what role is it going to play? You must understand that the media is now a very diminished and fractured trade in this country. It is no longer really the fifth estate. It is a diminished estate. And don't place much hope in the media playing a strong role. So the question then comes back, it's really what citizens are going to do. And I think that Megan has set a new example for people here in British Columbia, and I'd like to hear from her about what it's like to deal with a Tory MP on an uncomfortable issue.
So I guess maybe I'll start with a little bit about myself, because I'm not political and I never was. I joined a political party for the first time this year. It was only when I started learning more about Enbridge and about Bill C-38 that I really started to get concerned. And I really started asking myself what had to be done. I wanted to give you that background so that you can know that you have the power to do the same, and that every Canadian has the power to do the same. Don't give yourself exceptions. So, all I did was I wrote a letter to my MP, and I asked all my friends to write a letter to our MP. And it had enough effect, because he emailed me back and he said, I'll meet with you. And then I said, well, I think there's a lot of other people from Revelstoke that I'd also like to meet with you. So at 8:30 in the morning, on a workday morning, 30 people in Revelstoke met with our MP, David Wilkes. 30 people is a lot for Revelstoke, especially at 8:30 in the morning. And we had one of the most amazing meetings I've ever seen for democracy, because everyone there was extremely informed. And that really uplifted my heart. And they posed a lot of really great questions, and Wilkes responded with concern. He could not defend the budget bill, which is what the Conservative Party wanted him to do. He told us he couldn't vote against the bill, but he also didn't support it. He knew that it was not right for Canadians. It was not a good thing for Canadians.
Why did you vote for it?
The problem is it's a three-party, it's called a three-line whip vote. And because it's a budget bill, he has to vote with his party, or else he'll bring down if 13 Conservative MPs voted against the bill, it would bring down the government. So regardless, he gets pressure from Harper to vote for the bill. That being said, you hire your MP. It's not the other way around. So constituents have the power to say to their MP, no. And if you look at I invite all of you to just Google David Wilkes, YouTube, in the YouTube videos, search for David Wilkes. And in the videos he says, and this is coming from a Tory, if Canadians want change, they have to stand up to their MPs and say no. And so I want everyone in this room to encourage all their friends, particularly ones in Tory ridings, to stand up to their MPs, call or write them. It doesn't have to be a long letter. Just tell them no.